Count 4, aggravated murder.
And serve a term of life without parole.
Term of 2 years on that count.
Courtrooms are no stranger to drama, but when notorious killers end up passing out and collapsing in the middle of their trials, things suddenly become extra intense. Let's start by looking at the trial of Anthony Kirkland. Kirkland was no stranger to prison, and he had already served 16 years behind bars for the rape and murder of his then-girlfriend, Leola Douglas. But upon release, he went straight back to his old ways. Between the years of 2006 and 2009, he raped and murdered 4 other women: Cassandra Crawford, aged 14, Mary Jo Newton, aged 45, Kimya Rollison, aged 25, and Esme Kenny, aged just 13. While he burned all of the bodies, police were able to find enough DNA evidence to link Kirkland to the murders. They had Kirkland banged to rights, and the severity of his crimes called for an equally severe punishment. Knowing that the game was over, and there was no way he was going to be able to walk free ever again, Kirkland eventually confessed all to the police.
They say I am evil and a monster. They're right.
It seemed like an open and shut case, and there was no way that Kirkland was going to be able to get out of his punishment. But when the case went to court, it took another strange and dramatic twist. Things started to take a turn when the judge started to read out the many different crimes that Kirkland was being charged with. At first, Kirkland stands there and looks shocked, swaying slightly as he listens to the charges being read out. But after a few moments, he falls to the floor, banging against a table first. The lawyers and police officers around him quickly bend over to check that Kirkland is all right and see what had happened. After a few moments, the frenzy starts to die down a little, and Kirkland, who quickly regains consciousness, is helped back to his feet, though he remains unsteady. However, the judge is unmoved by Kirkland's collapse, and as soon as he is back upright, less than a minute after actually hitting the deck, he continues to reel off the list of charges that Kirkland was facing. The jury eventually finds Kirkland guilty of all the murders, and they return with a unanimous sentencing recommendation. The judge agreed with their decision, and despite his courtroom collapse, Kirkland was put on death row, where he awaits his final punishment. But if Kirkland's collapse shocked you, wait until you see what caused some of the other killers to pass out and hit the deck. Up next, we have the case of Jalil Smith Riley. In 2013, he attempted to rob a couple as they sat in their parked car. 22-year-old Portia Brooks and her boyfriend Aaron Martin were sat in their vehicle when they were approached by Smith Riley. He ordered Aaron out of the car and told him to hand over his money and valuables. When Aaron said that he didn't have anything, Smith Riley pulled out a gun and shot him in the head. He then leaned into the car and shot Portia before fleeing the scene. Passers-by contacted emergency services.
There was a guy outside of the car who looked like he was bleeding from multiple spots. There's a lady in it, and she's bleeding.
After 3 days in intensive care, Portia died because of the gunshot wounds she had received. Luckily, Aaron miraculously survived, though the attack caused him permanent brain damage. Smith Riley was quickly found and arrested and charged with aggravated murder and attempted murder. In order to avoid the death penalty, Smith Riley pleaded guilty and asked for leniency for his crimes.
Go back away. I'm so sorry.
At his sentencing hearing, Smith Riley continued to appear distraught over his crimes as the families of his victims spoke out against him.
But he killed me mentally, emotionally. He killed my identity as a mother of 3, as a family of 4. This is what I have left because of his greed, his selfishness, his complete disregard of and disrespect of others and life.
The fate of Smith Riley was in the hands of the judge, who listened to the evidence as well as testimonies from everyone involved. The defendant's lawyer even tried to point out that Smith Riley himself was a victim, beating himself up over what he had done and recounting how much he regretted his actions on that fateful day. Unfortunately for Smith Riley, the judge was not feeling very lenient, and this is when things took a startling turn. While the death penalty was off of the table, the judge could still hand down a severe and harsh punishment. But when he did, Smith Riley buckled and fell to the ground.
Court defendants serve a term of life without parole. As to count 4, for the offense of attempted murder, violate.
Unfazed by Smith Riley's reaction, the judge continues to read out the sentence. It was far too late for guilt and remorse. As the judge spoke, court officers lifted Smith Riley back to his feet. He might not have wanted to hear the words, but the judge was determined that Smith Riley would be held accountable for the senseless murders of Portia and Aaron. Despite his courtroom theatrics, Smith Riley was ultimately hit with a life sentence without the possibility of parole. But sometimes, it doesn't even get as far as the sentencing hearing before a killer passes out. That's what happened with powerful music mogul Suge Knight. In January 2015, Suge Knight was involved in a deadly incident outside a Compton burger stand in California. As he pulled his red pickup truck into the parking lot, Knight ended up in an altercation with his longtime rival, Clee Sloan. Sloan approached the pickup truck, seemingly irate to see Knight. A CCTV camera picked up the altercation. After a few moments, Knight reversed his pickup truck, knocking down Sloan. He then drove his car at Sloan as he lay in the middle of the road, driving over him and also hitting a passerby, a man named Terry Carter who owned a local business. Carter was instantly killed and Sloan suffered extremely serious injuries. Aware that the police would be after him, Knight handed himself in style, arriving at the station wearing shades and smoking a cigar, as paparazzi snapped images of him walking into the building. But while he might have appeared calm and collected when arriving at the station, it was clear that Knight was feeling anything but that when it came to appearing in front of a judge. There was a bail hearing where the judge set a $25 million bond, something which Knight's lawyer tried to argue against. But it was during these remarks that Knight, who was seated at the time, passed out, slumping to the side. Court officers rushed over to try to help. Whether the collapse was caused by the guilt of his crimes or the sheer amount of money that he might have to hand over to walk free, we may never know. But an ambulance was soon on the scene and Knight was rushed to hospital. When he was over his episode and he returned to court, he had to face the wrath of the daughter of his victim.
What I do know is that your unrepentant, remorseful, callous, unashamed actions took my dad's life away. He is truly a disgusting, selfless disgrace to human decency.
One thing was for certain, though, and that was that the judge was unmoved by Knight's collapse and handed down a harsh sentence that would be enough to make anyone weak at the knees.
For the crime which defendant has been convicted in count 1 for a total unstayed term of 28 years.
Up next, we have the case of Tony Farmer. Farmer was a highly recruited basketball player from Ohio. It was undeniable that he had some incredible skill on a basketball court, but that did not stop him getting into trouble. In 2012, Farmer assaulted his ex-girlfriend, Andrea Lane, outside her apartment complex in Bedford Heights. As 18-year-old Andrea left her building, she suddenly noticed Farmer waiting for her and reacted, worried that she was going to be hurt. Farmer then tried to snatch her bag from her, and in a panic, Andrea clings onto it. This just escalated the matter, and Farmer punches her to the ground before continuing with his assault. Eventually, Farmer was arrested for this horrific assault, and while his ex-girlfriend asked for leniency, hyping that he would be able to learn from it, the judge was not in a lenient mood. In fact, she threw the book at him, despite his rising stardom. But it's how Farmer reacted at his sentencing hearing that was the most shocking thing of all. He fell to the floor, barely being caught by a court officer. But the internet saw the funny side of this, and remixed his reaction into an endless stream of memes that went viral all across the net. Farmer was eventually lifted back to his feet, while the judge continued to read her sentences out. As he listened to his FAR, he was still incredibly unsure on his feet, swaying and stumbling at the shock of having to spend the next 3 years of his life behind bars.
All of these terms are going to be served concurrently, which means that the defendant is, in effect, going to spend 3 years in prison.
If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. But this is nothing compared to how the next criminal reacted while in the courtroom. Kelson Wilkins found himself in trouble with the law and found himself facing felony assault charges for attempted murder. But when it came to his case heading to court, Wilkins decided not to get a lawyer, but to instead represent himself, something that the judge advised him was a very bad idea, especially in a case as serious as this one. Wilkins' inexperience caused many delays throughout the process. Along the way, Wilkins had tried to disrupt court proceedings a number of times, repeatedly calling his case a modern-day lynching, and acting as if he was the one who was being victimized.
Would you please ask the bailiff and the sheriffs to just go get a tree and bring it in here, just miss the hanging, let the lynching, you know, because this is a lynching, I mean.
The judge suspected that he was doing all of this so as to avoid jail time. In fact, she reached a breaking point and told Wilkins that she would no longer be standing for any of his nonsense. But during one court session, something unexpected happened. While questioning a witness, Wilkins started to seem unsure on his feet, and he clutched his chest as if he were in pain. Wilkins then weakly told the judge that he needed a little time before slowly leaning to one side and falling over, toppling a chair on top of him in the process. But court medical experts checked him over and made a startling, yet somewhat predictable, discovery about Wilkins's condition. As Wilkins sat slumped in a chair, a doctor gave their assessment on his health. But Wilkins's performance wasn't done there. Instead of giving up on trying to feign a medical emergency, he keeps going and pretends to be unresponsive in his chair. The judge shows no sympathy, though, and continues with the trial. Despite his less than Oscar-winning performance, Wilkins was ultimately found to be guilty of all charges and sentenced to 42 years in prison. Not only was his career of being a lawyer over, but so was his ability to be a free man. The final case we're going to look at is that of Shenita Cunningham and Erica Butts. The two of them were accused of abusing and murdering a 3-year-old child named Serenity Richardson when they were babysitting for her at her home in Somerville. They whipped the child when she accidentally urinated on the floor, and when she passed out from their beatings, they tried to revive her using bleach and an ice bath. Poor Serenity died of over 250 injuries. The judge could not believe what she was seeing when she looked at photos of the injuries inflicted on Serenity and had medical testimony from experts who examined the child's body.
The severity of the blow to that child's leg, and you said that you did not recognize what had been done. To ignore what must have been the excruciating sounds that came from that child on a daily basis is more than disconcerting to this court.
Both Cunningham and Butts confessed to their crimes, not that they were really able to deny what they had done. And it didn't take long for the judge to make her mind up on what their sentence had to be. But this is where things took a turn for the weird. It was obviously an emotional time for the family of Serenity Richardson, but one of her relatives started screeching and screaming from the gallery where people could sit and watch the trial. But at the same time, both Cunningham and Butts dropped to the floor. It would seem that Cunningham and Butts couldn't handle the fact that they would be spending the rest of their lives behind bars for what they did to the innocent young girl. But the strange happenings didn't end there. As people in the courtroom tried to get the two killers back to their feet, their families called out from the gallery, urging them to stand back up. Cunningham and Butts were both eventually picked up and placed onto chairs and wheeled out of the courtroom. They were both hyperventilating and had to be restrained as they were wildly thrashing around. Still, no matter how they reacted, nothing would change the fact that both women would pay for the abuse and murder of Serenity. If they couldn't believe their sentence and they collapsed, well, that's on them. Making such a spectacular scene in court was never going to change the facts and the eventual outcome. So now it's over to you. How would you have reacted if you'd have seen these notorious criminals passing out in court? Let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and a subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.